Nancy, it is such a pleasure to be here talking with you today. It really is an honor.
Thank you, Jillian. I'm very thrilled to be here. I'm really glad you asked me.
Now, we're not going to start by reviewing your entire story because I know that is a disappointment.
I like to go through it for 2 or 3 hours at a time.
I'm sure. We don't have an entire day to record what you've been through. But what we will do is refer our listeners and viewers to some links of your choosing that really give that context so they can get up to speed before or after listening. But what I want to start by asking you today is what the John Maddox Prize is, and if you could start by telling me a bit about what that prize meant.
So the John Maddox was a former editor of Nature journals. And the Maddox Prize is very specific because there are a lot of prizes that are given for people who defend science. And this prize is given for people who defend science against great conflict or controversy or attack, really. So most of the people who are nominated have had long histories, possibly not as long as mine. Mine was a senior award, and there's a junior award as well for people who have been through less, but just as much, but less time. And it really does involve, usually, the identification of a problematic scientific finding, pointing that out, and getting really punished for that. No good deed goes unpunished, that's for sure. So you identify the problem, or sometimes research fraud, in some case research misconduct. The famous sleuth Elizabeth Bick was honored the year before me, and she is the one who goes through and has this genius for picking out duplicated and photoshopped images in basic science. It's kind of, she'll say, look at this, and I think, I can't even see the difference. So you really have to have a talent. But so those kinds of people are honored by the John Maddox Prize, and I don't know if there's another award like that, because there's a lot of awards for courage and for resilience, but this one is for specifically identifying problems in science, to which John Maddox was dedicated, against the odds, really. When I was there, I thought, boy, I can't wait to nominate, and I had this year 2 people, other people to this, because there's a long list of us, and it meant a great deal. It meant that I met people who are like-minded, which is hard to describe how great that is.
I want to ask you, we talk a lot about advocacy in medicine, and we talk about advocacy as a CanMed's pillar. What does advocacy in medicine mean to you?
I would say that advocacy is really focusing on the patient. But it is also not always going to be your story, my story. What surprised me, and what's been written about, it still surprises me, or the 4 or 5 people, I say 4 because there were 4 at Sick Kids who really put their lives and jobs on the line. In fact, their lives and jobs were in constant threat because we had a very creative hospital administration at the time which learned how to harm them as well as me. And that old saying, to be a good ally, if you're not getting hit by the rocks, you're not standing close enough. Well, these guys were up against it the whole time. And so they knew the secret of advocacy, which was not focusing on whether the person, the individual, is annoying that morning or bugging you or called you 3 times to remind you about something. The point is, as all my colleagues would have said, it was always about the patient. And so it was impossible to misinterpret our story. It was impossible to interpret our story as anything except about patient safety. And so when people say it's not my circus, not my monkey, it is, because was it Paul Farmer who said, doctors are the lawyers for the poor, right? Anyway, I think that people don't advocate strongly enough because they're afraid.
And as you talk, I feel right here with you in the room that outrage, what's at the core of it. And I wonder, where does that go? Because so often we see our students come in, they have that deep sense of goodness. They understand the fundamental difference, and there's lots of nuance in many situations, as we know, but there are so many things they would look at and say, we all agree, this is the right way to behave. This is the wrong way to behave. How do we stop the erosion of that if that is what happens in medicine?
Most people, if they say 10% of the people will do the right thing all the time, 10% of the people will do the wrong thing all the time, then 80% of us are malleable. And you've asked me the question, how you make those people change.
I think it's one misconception that people often have when someone takes a really, what they would describe as a courageous stand. They have this idea, I think, that it doesn't affect you in the same way, that you're tougher, you're more resilient, you're made of a different substance, whereas it would cause them more pain, more suffering, which is not true.
No, it's not true at all.
Could you talk a bit about that?
Sure. First of all, you actually yourself, when you get into these things, you actually amplify that because you want the administration not to know how fearful and tearful and broke you are. So like, I'm living in a hovel, but like, so flesh wound. Remember Monty Python with anyway, you don't want to see them, you don't want them to see you injured. So you rapidly try to assume this bluff and tough exterior. Yeah, and also people say, well, Carl told me, he said that somebody said to him, well, you just don't mind being disliked. And Carl said, yeah, I mind being disliked as much as the next guy, and so do I. Probably not as much as the next guy, because by that time I had real scorn for most of my colleagues. Not my colleagues, but my superiors, for sure. And no, I think it also is practical. You start practice, you start thinking that's wrong. And maybe you're, like Carl, you are a coward at the beginning, or you claim to be a coward at the beginning. I don't know if that's completely wrong. I think there are people who are too scared to raise their neck above the trench. And I don't know where that comes from. Bullying in childhood, domineering parents who didn't ask them what the right way to go was, parents who said, don't answer back. I didn't have those kind of parents. I have a lot of people who say to me, if I had your gang, the gang of four, we called them, I would have succeeded. And I say, yeah, you would have. You would have. I mean, whatever success looks like. It's not ever success when you're a whistleblower, I guess, but it is a relative success if you don't completely lose your job or your university appointment. I mean, people do all the time, right? And contemporaneously and later, I had many people say this to me. And when they met the gang, they really couldn't believe it. They're unbelievable people. But you don't really need unbelievable people. You just need 4 or 5 people.
What occurs to me, Nancy, is a minute ago you talked about people who think, I can't stick my neck out, even if we both definitely agree that there's nothing, in a sense, special about a person who's able to do that. They have the same fear and anxiety as anybody else doing that. A person who says, you know what, for whatever reason, I can't do that. What else can they do? How can they be of support to a colleague who is perhaps the one taking a risk as a whistleblower? What else is helpful?
That is a great question, because I'm writing my book, which will end in about 2050. If anybody's still alive, they can read it. And I remember that, Peter, one of our gang, would draft a petition. He was you may have known him, Peter Dury, he went to MAC. He was a very extraordinarily extroverted and charming man. So he would, I'm going to sit down and talk to you the Olivieri case. I don't want to talk about it, Peter. Oh, I think you do. Anyway, here's the story, and here you can sign the petition. Listen, 75 people have already signed, and people will go, oh, okay, I'll sign. Because that is, not that scary when 75 people have already signed the petition. That's one thing. Or attend the meeting. And a couple of Peter's colleagues, although it was quite an extraordinary division, the gastro division at Sickle, they were all courageous. When we were shouted down by the administration, one of the older colleagues says, stop, just one thing he said in that whole saga was, stop trying to quiet them. You must let them speak. We're all like, oh my God, you're a hero. Or, artists offered money, and they offered paintings in lieu of our legal fees. None of our lawyers accepted them, but that kind of thing. I still have all the letters. Or write a private letter. In this day and age, I still have boxes of things I called nice letters, where, I'm an ordinary citizen, but I really realized that it could have been my daughter. And as far as the inner circles, that is the people in medicine, I guess you're not like this, so you won't understand this, but there are a lot of people who don't engage in anything. Do you know that old saying by Don Berwick, we should applaud heroes and hope they are among us? To base our reliance on the operation of normal systems on the basis of extraordinary courage is foolhardy. We need systems in place it's a beautiful quote. It's BMJ 1998. I can send it to you. It's we need systems in place that say, oh, those people over there are suffering, but we are the institution that can take over. We are the John Maddox Prize that recognizes people who come up against it in conflict. And there are Canadian institutions that can do that.
One of the things we often talk about in these conversations, Nancy, has to do with well-being. And I feel sort of silly even asking you the question throughout all of this, what kept you well? Because I think that question suggests that there's anything that really can blunt the kind of duress and stress and suffering that was caused to you and the kind of sacrifices you made. So with that disclaimer, I still want to ask, what do you hold on to during these times?
I think the acute stuff drives you along. It's the later stuff. I think, I can't recommend this book too highly about the whistleblowers because most of them end up, or as somebody else said, I don't think this is Carl's prose, they end up divorced, never seeing their kids and living above a Radio Shack. That wasn't me, thanks to my colleagues. So I didn't really, I can't believe I'm saying this, have it as hard as many people did. I mean, I listen to these stories and read the ones in Carl's book. I think a part of this is probably genetic. You've got to be able to say to yourself, I'm making some kind of history. May I be changing everything? No, but at least we're all working together and we know we're in the right. That was never in question. And we all had kind of supportive families. Nobody said, nobody complained about supportive families of origin, and we had supportive spouses. And that was probably why we got through.
Well, I love how you framed that as well, because it's really a holistic perspective on resilience. It's the social safety net. It's the epigenetics. It's also being boosted by a social circle, the power of other people rising up to support us. And I love how you frame that, because I think what it highlights is in the absence of 1, 2, or 3 of those things, maybe the story evolves in a completely different way with a much different outcome.
Yes, absolutely. It's so easy to say if they hadn't been there, I wouldn't have been here. But it's true, and that's 100% true. And that's why even a little bit of help means that, you go a little further. And I was walking along the street, and Mendelssohn Joe, who was an artist and singer and very talented guy, who was kind of in touch with me. He lived way up north, and he heard about the story, and he used to write me all the time. And he called me, and he said, "Hi, it's Mendelssohn Joe. I don't know why I'm calling you. I don't think you even have my number to call me back, but I just had this urge to call you today. It was in the middle of the worst day of my life." And he said, "I just want to tell you that you're doing everything right. And sometimes life's real strange. You don't have to call me back." And I remember that is the day where I'm thinking, like, the really unbelievable. You never know how you're going to help somebody. You never know when you're going to be kind and someone's going to need it. I'm sure you've had this situation where you've been training trainees and you feel like saying, if this person asks me one more question, I am going to lose the will to live and then I'm going to shoot them. But then you're kind instead. And at the end of the night, they say, thank you. And you feel,
Yes. Or years later, somebody comes back, or we go back to somebody
years later,
and we say, you said this, you probably don't even remember who I am, but I lived on those scraps of kindness for years. And
it's terrible that you have to live on those scraps of kindness, but you do.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
So wasn't that nice most of the time? So I can remember the times I was.
Yeah. Well, Nancy, again, I would reiterate, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring your story to these conversations is I think we have a whole generation of young learners who don't know what you went through, who don't understand, again, because of the nature of their, the generation that they're part of, who would not understand the long arc of what it was.
Yeah.
And yeah. I think, again, it's still hard, even as someone who's been around for that whole time, it's hard to process it.
Well, I would hope that they see what they're up against, because frankly, I don't know about your kids, but my child doesn't want to go into medicine, and I'm okay with that, like so okay with that, because I think it's different than when I went in 47 years ago or 48 years ago. Oh, I know, so long ago. But my point is that the younger generation doesn't necessarily have to hear about me to recognize they are going to be up against it. a lot. You know, I told you just before we started shooting that Carl, and my favorite quote by Carl is something in a chapter called "The Corruption of Character in Medicine," and he says that doctors must find a moral compass that dictates their daily life in which they can find meaning. But a compass is useless if you put a magnet next to it. I told my gang this, they all went, oh. But the magnets are there stronger and stronger, the push for power. When our parents and grandparents entered medical school, I mean, it just wasn't like this. It was a different time, but the magnets weren't there as well. I mean, maybe the people were different, but you know, the old thing, it's very difficult for a man to understand something if his salary depends on him not understanding it. So that's where we should clear it out in medicine. There really isn't any other approach. Arthur Schaefer wrote about this 25 years ago. And stop telling me how to manage these conflicts of interest. Stop telling me how we interact with industry. Stop. There are enclaves that do not deserve industry. We have to separate them. We don't have to lose them, but we have to separate them. And you'd see a lot more character in medicine because people are really not brought up to say money is not the most important thing. They believe that it is. It shocks me still. But anyway, I think that the younger generation, I don't know how to best educate them. Stories are good. I do teach a course, as I said, and some people cry, which I consider the major endpoint. The primary endpoint of my course is to have people cry. And when they cry, I think, oh my God, great. Then I talk to them, and they say, well, everything's a mess. The FDA is a mess, and the pharmaceutical, and everybody's lying on. I said, well, yeah, they are. But, you realize it now. Isn't this great? One more person. Now, they're not medical students, but some of them are into medicine. Anyway, I think I sound kind of hopeless. I think it's because I am kind of hopeless. I used to end those talks I used to give in the 90s and 2000s with, and I just think we really have to stand up for research integrity and scientific force and patients, picturing patients, clinical trials, until I realized, I don't think this is very authentic. I don't think I'm really telling the truth. I think we're in a losing game. And, my dad said, always change a losing game. So we have to change this. I don't know how to do it. Maybe small things are important.
Small things are so important. And I also think being a realist is important.
Yeah, me too.
Portraying the possibility for radical change in a short period of time is completely unrealistic.
Right.
But the idea that we can light small candles in the darkness, that's not unrealistic.
Yes.
Nancy, I want to thank you for helping us to name the magnets. And I want to thank you for being a compass to so many of us.
Thank you very much.
And for being here with me today. What an honor to talk.
Thank you. It's been an honor to talk to you. Thank you.